There comes a sacred moment in the journey when the search itself becomes the veil. For years, perhaps lifetimes, you may have sought God as though God were distant, hidden or reserved for a higher place or holier time. You prayed upward, looked outward, waited patiently, hoping one day to arrive. Yet the greatest revelation comes when you discover that what you have been seeking has never been absent. It is the seeker that was imagined. The moment you stop seeking God, something extraordinary happens. The noise of striving falls silent. The constant effort to become spiritual relaxes, and in that stillness, awareness awakens to itself. You realize that God was never the object of your search, but the source of your searching. To seek God is to assume separation. It suggests that God is there and you are here. But truth does not live in distance. Truth lives in being. When seeking ends, recognition begins. You recognize that the consciousness looking for God is the very life of God expressing itself. This does not inflate the personal self. On the contrary, it dissolves it. The small sense of me, trying to reach heaven fades, and what remains is presence, quiet, whole, complete. You do not become God as a person. Rather, the false person yields, and God alone is revealed as your true identity. Seeking God implies separation because the very act of seeking is rooted in the assumption that what is sought is not already present. When a person seeks God, consciously or unconsciously, they establish a distance between themselves and the divine, positioning God as an object to be found rather than the reality within which they already exist. This assumption subtly reinforces the belief that God is elsewhere, higher, purer, or more complete than the one who seeks. As long as this belief remains, the seeker lives in a state of spiritual incompleteness, always moving toward something rather than resting in what is. The habit of seeking often arises from sincere devotion, yet devotion mixed with separation perpetuates struggle. Prayer becomes effort, meditation becomes concentration, and spiritual practice becomes a means to reach a future state. In this framework, God is postponed, always just beyond the next insight, the next discipline, or the next transformation. This creates a spiritual tension where fulfillment is delayed and peace feels conditional. The seeker believes that with enough sincerity, suffering, or persistence, God will eventually reveal himself, unaware that the sense of absence being felt is created by the act of seeking itself. Seeking also strengthens the personal self, because there must be a me who seeks and a God who is sought. This reinforces identity as a separate individual striving for divine approval or closeness. The ego quietly survives even in spiritual clothing, measuring progress, evaluating experiences, and comparing itself to others. Instead of dissolving the sense of separation, seeking often refines it, giving it spiritual justification. The seeker becomes spiritually ambitious, hoping to arrive somewhere higher than the present moment. When seeking stops, not out of resignation but out of insight, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve. The mind grows quiet because it no longer has an object to chase. In that stillness, awareness recognizes itself. What was believed to be God out there is revealed as the very consciousness that has been aware of the search all along. This recognition is not intellectual, it is experiential, immediate, and deeply peaceful. Nothing new is acquired, yet everything is revealed. The end of seeking does not diminish reverence, it deepens it. God is no longer imagined as distant or conditional, but known as the substance of being itself. Life is no longer approached as a spiritual journey toward God, but lived as the expression of God. The need to reach, improve, or prove fades, replaced by a quiet confidence that divine presence is not something to be achieved, but something to be acknowledged. The moment seeking ends, separation collapses, effort relaxes, and awareness stands revealed as what it has always been, silently present, complete, and whole. Recognition replaces seeking when awareness turns inward and becomes still, because truth is not discovered through movement, but revealed through presence. Seeking is an outward motion of the mind, always directed toward an object, an experience, or a future realization. It depends on effort, time, and expectation, Recognition, however, arises when this outward motion gently collapses and attention rests in its own source. When awareness stops reaching and instead remains quietly attentive, it begins to notice itself. What once seemed hidden becomes obvious, not because it appears, but because nothing is obscuring it anymore. As long as the mind is busy searching, it is occupied with concepts, images, and goals. Even spiritual ideas can become objects that distract awareness from its own nature. The moment awareness turns inward, it is no longer interested in acquiring anything. It is simply present. This inward turning is not an action, but a relaxation of action. There is no technique involved, no method to apply, no special state to manufacture. Stillness happens naturally when the compulsion to seek loses its momentum. In that stillness, awareness no longer identifies itself as a seeker, but as the space in which seeking once occurred. Recognition is immediate because it does not rely on progress. Seeking assumes distance, but recognition reveals that distance never existed. When awareness becomes still, it recognizes that it has always been whole. The sense of incompleteness that fueled seeking is seen as a misunderstanding, not a condition that needs to be repaired. Awareness realizes it was never moving toward truth. It was truth, temporarily distracted by motion. This inward stillness is not blankness or dullness. It is alive, alert, and deeply conscious. Thoughts may still arise, sensations may still appear, but they no longer define identity. Awareness remains unentangled, observing without effort. In this state, understanding does not come as new information but as clarity. Confusion fades because it is no longer being fed by constant mental activity. The need to interpret or analyze dissolves, replaced by a quiet certainty that does not need explanation. When recognition replaces seeking, the relationship with life changes. Experiences are no longer used as proof of spiritual progress. Success and failure lose their power to define worth. There is a sense of ease, not because circumstances are perfect, but because awareness is no longer dependent on circumstances for fulfillment. Action still happens, but it arises from clarity rather than desire. Choices are made without inner conflict because they are not driven by the need to become something more. This recognition also removes urgency. Seeking always carries tension because it believes something essential is missing. Recognition reveals that nothing has ever been lacking. The peace that was hoped for in the future is found to be present now, not as an emotional high, but as a stable ground of being. Awareness rests in itself effortlessly, without resistance, without expectation, without demand. As awareness remains still, recognition deepens on its own. There is no need to maintain it, protect it, or repeat it. It is self-sustaining because it is natural. The mind may return to old habits of seeking, but awareness is no longer convinced by them. It has seen through the illusion of movement and discovered the quiet truth of being that has always been present beneath every search. God is not an object to be found because anything that can be found is something separate from the one who finds it. Objects exist within awareness, appear to awareness, and disappear from awareness, but awareness itself cannot be turned into an object without misunderstanding its nature. When God is treated as something to locate, experience, or possess, God is reduced to a concept or event within consciousness. This subtly places God inside time and space, subject to coming and going, which contradicts the very meaning of the divine as infinite and ever-present. The search for God as an object often takes the form of waiting for a special feeling, a mystical vision, or a dramatic transformation. The mind imagines that one day God will appear as a powerful presence, a voice, or an overwhelming sensation. While such experiences may occur, they are still experiences, and experiences arise and pass. If God were found only in experience, then God would disappear when the experience ends. This leads to repeated seeking, because the mind tries to recapture what has already faded, mistaking temporary states for eternal reality. The deeper truth is that God is the very consciousness by which experience is known. Before any thought arises, before any sensation is felt, before any spiritual idea is formed, there is awareness. That awareness does not come and go. It does not improve or decline. It does not need to be purified or perfected. It simply is. When attention rests here, it becomes clear that awareness is not observing God. Awareness is the living presence traditionally called God. This recognition shifts identity at its root. Instead of identifying as a person who occasionally experiences God, there is an understanding of being the field in which the person appears. Thoughts, emotions, memories, and roles move through awareness like clouds through the sky. They do not define the sky, and they do not alter its nature. In the same way, human experiences do not define or alter the divine consciousness that knows them. When God is understood as consciousness itself, effort dissolves. There is no need to reach upward or inward to find something hidden. Awareness is already fully present, effortlessly aware of itself. The sense of distance collapses because there was never a gap between awareness and God. The belief in separation was created by thought, not by reality. This understanding does not negate devotion, reverence, or humility. Instead, it removes false humility rooted in separation and replaces it with a quiet reverence for life itself. Every moment becomes sacred, not because it contains something holy, but because it is known by holiness. Ordinary actions are no longer separate from spiritual life, because there is no longer a division between the sacred and the mundane. Seeing God as consciousness also dissolves fear. Fear depends on the belief that life is happening to a vulnerable individual. When identity shifts to awareness itself, there is a deep sense of stability. Awareness is not threatened by change, loss, or uncertainty because it remains untouched by what passes through it. The body may age, circumstances may shift, emotions may rise and fall, but awareness remains unchanged, silently present, witnessing without resistance. This recognition is not an achievement and cannot be claimed by the ego. The ego thrives on ownership, but awareness owns nothing and lacks nothing. It is complete by nature. When the idea of finding God is released, what remains is the simple knowing of being aware, and in that knowing, the divine is no longer sought as something other than oneself, but recognized as the very light by which all knowing occurs. The personal self dissolves as identity shifts from form to presence, because the sense of being a separate individual is sustained entirely by identification with form. Form includes the body, the name, the history, the personality, the beliefs, and the roles that have been accumulated over time. These elements create the feeling of a solid me, yet upon close observation, each of them is seen to be temporary, changing, and known by something deeper. When attention turns away from form and rests in the awareness that knows form, identity begins to loosen its attachment to these surface definitions. The personal self is not destroyed, it is seen through. Thoughts that once declared, "This is who I am," are recognized as mental events arising in awareness. Emotions that once felt defining are experienced as movements passing through presence. Even the body, which seems so central to identity, is revealed as a field of sensations appearing within awareness. As this recognition deepens, the center of identity quietly shifts. One no longer feels located in the body or confined to a personal story. There is a sense of being the space in which the body and story appear. Presence is not something that replaces the person, it is what has always been present beneath the person. The personal self was a set of assumptions layered over this presence. When those assumptions lose their authority, the need to defend, improve, or validate the self weakens. Life no longer feels like a project of self-construction. There is a natural simplicity in being, free from the constant effort of maintaining an image. As identity shifts to presence, reactions soften. Situations that once triggered strong emotional responses are met with greater spaciousness. This is not emotional suppression, but a widening of perspective. Emotions are allowed to arise fully without being owned as identity. Anger, sadness, or joy move through awareness without leaving residue. Because they are no longer personalized, they lose their power to dominate behavior. This dissolution of the personal self also alters relationships. Others are no longer encountered primarily as roles or reflections of one's own self-image. There is a deeper sense of meeting life directly, without filters. Compassion arises naturally, not as a moral effort, but as a recognition of shared being. The same presence that is known as oneself is recognized in others, even when their behavior is challenging. Fear diminishes as identity moves away from form. Fear depends on the belief that what one is can be threatened or lost. When identity rests in presence, which is not born and does not die, the foundation of fear weakens. Challenges may still arise and pain may still be felt, but there is a quiet stability beneath the movement of life. One no longer feels fundamentally at risk. Action continues, but it no longer arises from a need to protect or enhance a personal identity. Decisions are made with clarity rather than anxiety. Effort is replaced by responsiveness. Life feels less like a struggle to survive and more like a flow to participate in. The personal self becomes a functional expression rather than a psychological burden. As this shift stabilizes, there is a profound sense of intimacy with life. Nothing feels separate or distant. The world is no longer something to confront from behind a self. It is experienced from within presence itself. In this way, the personal self gently dissolves, not into emptiness, but into the fullness of being that has always been present, quietly holding every form without ever becoming one. Grace is revealed, not earned, when effort and striving cease, because grace is not a reward for spiritual labor, but the natural condition of being aligned with reality. The belief that grace must be earned arises from the same mindset that governs personal achievement, where value is measured by effort, discipline, or moral performance. When this mindset is applied to spiritual life, it creates the assumption that divine favor is conditional and must be secured through constant practice, sacrifice, or inner struggle. This assumption quietly places the individual at the center as a door attempting to reach something higher, while grace remains imagined as something withheld until certain conditions are met. Striving, even when spiritual in appearance, reinforces the sense of personal control. The seeker believes that through enough effort, awareness will finally open, peace will finally arrive, or truth will finally be granted. Yet this effort keeps attention fixed on becoming rather than being. Grace does not emerge from becoming because becoming exists in time and grace is timeless. As long as there is effort aimed at future attainment, attention is diverted from what is already present. When effort ceases, not through exhaustion but through understanding, a subtle shift occurs. The mind relaxes its grip on control, the constant measuring of progress slows. The inner pressure to improve or purify oneself begins to dissolve. In this relaxation, awareness naturally settles into itself. There is no dramatic event required. What appears instead is a gentle clarity, a sense of being supported without cause. This is grace revealing itself, not as something newly given, but as something newly noticed. Grace has always been present, but it is obscured by striving. Striving creates noise and grace is quiet. Striving is rooted in the belief that something is lacking, while grace reveals that nothing essential has ever been missing. When the belief in lack dissolves, grace no longer needs to arrive, it simply stands unobstructed. Life begins to feel guided rather than managed. Situations unfold with a sense of rightness that cannot be traced to personal effort. This does not lead to passivity or indifference. Action still happens, but it arises without strain. Choices feel clear without excessive analysis. Movement flows from intuition rather than anxiety. Grace expresses itself as ease, not in the absence of challenge, but in the absence of inner resistance. Even difficulties are met with a sense of underlying support, as though life itself is cooperating rather than opposing. Earning implies separation between giver and receiver. Grace dissolves this separation by revealing that the source of life and the life being lived are not two. When effort ceases, the illusion of separation weakens. There is no longer a sense of standing before something divine hoping to be accepted. Instead, there is a recognition of being held within what is divine. This recognition brings humility, not the humility of unworthiness, but the humility of seeing that personal will was never the true source of life's unfolding. In this state, gratitude arises naturally, not because something has been granted, but because something false has fallen away. The heart feels open without effort. Trust replaces control. The need to justify one's existence fades. Grace is no longer sought as an intervention, but lived as the quiet intelligence moving through every moment, sustaining without demand, giving without condition, revealing itself fully when the hands of striving finally release their grip. Life flows harmoniously when action arises from divine awareness rather than ego, because ego-driven action is rooted in fear, lack, and personal control, while action arising from awareness is rooted in clarity, wholeness, and trust. The ego believes it must manage life, protect identity, and secure outcomes in order to survive. From this belief comes tension, overthinking, and resistance. Even when results appear successful, they are often accompanied by exhaustion or anxiety because the ego remains vigilant, always anticipating the next threat or failure. Divine awareness does not act from calculation. It responds. When awareness is recognized as the ground of being, action becomes a natural expression rather than a forced effort. There is a sense of right timing and right movement that cannot be planned by the thinking mind. Decisions emerge quietly, without inner debate, and are carried out without the heavy emotional investment that characterizes ego will. This does not mean that thought disappears, but thought is no longer in charge. It serves rather than dominates. When action flows from awareness, resistance diminishes. Life is no longer approached as something to conquer or manipulate. Challenges are met with openness instead of defensiveness. This openness allows intelligence beyond personal reasoning to operate. Solutions appear that the ego could not have engineered because the ego is limited by its past experiences and fears. Awareness, being unconfined, responds creatively and freshly to each situation. Harmony arises not because circumstances are controlled, but because there is alignment with the movement of life. Ego will often pushes against reality, insisting that things should be different in order to feel safe or fulfilled. This pushing creates friction. Awareness, on the other hand, recognizes what is without judgment and acts from that recognition. Action taken from acceptance carries less struggle because it is not divided against reality. There is a sense of cooperation with life rather than opposition to it. This shift also changes the experience of effort. Ego-driven effort feels heavy because it is fueled by self-concern. Awareness-driven action may involve great energy, but it does not feel burdensome. There is a feeling of being carried by the action rather than carrying it. Work becomes engagement rather than obligation. Even rest feels purposeful because it is not tinged with guilt or avoidance. Relationships are deeply affected by this change in action. Ego will seek validation, control, or advantage, often leading to conflict or misunderstanding. Action arising from awareness is not preoccupied with self-image. Listening becomes deeper. Responses become more authentic. Compassion arises naturally because there is less separation between self and other. Interaction becomes less reactive and more attuned to the moment. Trust is a natural outcome of living from awareness. Ego does not trust life because it believes it is alone. Awareness knows itself as life. From this knowing comes a quiet confidence that does not depend on guarantees. Uncertainty is no longer threatening, it is simply part of the movement of existence. This allows action to remain flexible rather than rigid, adaptive rather than controlling. Over time, this way of living reveals a subtle order beneath apparent chaos. Events begin to connect in meaningful ways without being forced. What is needed appears when it is needed, not always in expected forms, but with a sense of appropriateness. Life feels less like a series of problems to solve and more like a continuous unfolding to participate in. When action arises from divine awareness rather than ego will, harmony is not manufactured. It is recognized as the natural state that emerges when the illusion of personal control quietly steps aside. The journey described in this message is not a movement toward something distant, but a return to what has always been present. Seeking ends where recognition begins and striving dissolves in the light of understanding. What once appeared as God outside, above, or beyond is revealed as the very awareness through which life is known. As identity shifts from form to presence, the personal self loosens its grip. Effort gives way to grace, and action flows naturally from a deeper intelligence. Life is no longer lived as a struggle to reach the divine, but as the quiet expression of the divine already living itself. In this recognition, nothing needs to be added, improved, or attained. What remains is a simple, steady knowing of being whole, guided, and complete, where peace is not achieved but remembered, and life unfolds in harmony without resistance.